Hello, everyone. My name is Blake Harvard. You may know me better in the Twitter world as the Effortful Educator. And I just want to talk with everyone a little bit today about honesty in the classroom. Honesty for students, honesty for teachers, honesty in the realm of learning and what it means to be honest with ourselves, again, as teacher and as students, and how that can impact how we see our learning and impact how we tailor our learning. It's an incredibly important topic that I don't think gets enough play, and I don't think that we think about it honestly as much as we should. We do a lot of assumption, and I'm going to talk about that today. Do a lot of assumption about our learning and what we know and what we don't know when we're not really sure. And just want to kind of focus on that and focus on how we can focus on that in the classroom with our students to make them better learners. While in the class, but also in the future, right? As they're going to be learning their entire lives. Think about this. I think we've probably all done something like this before as a teacher. We have our students take an assessment of some sort in class, answer questions, and you give them, 10 or 15 minutes to complete an assessment, answer as many questions as you can, the usual spiel there, right? And then afterwards, we're going to go over the answers, obviously, to make sure we got what we got, see what we got right, but then also to see what we need to learn, right? But, the usual order of operations there is that we start going over the answers, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever, however many you got. And the students write down, the answers they missed, so that at the end of it all, they have all, let's say, 10 answers. Now, before we went over the questions, they may have only had 3 or 4 right. But at the end of that assessment, they look down and they see 10 questions with 10 answers. So the assumption there is obviously that, hey, I know 10 things now, when really they're not being honest with themselves, right? And to be fair, the way the teachers have provided that activity for them, it's not honest either, right? There's a better way of doing it, which I hope to show a little bit today. We want to avoid situations like that where the kids get the answers and then they just assume, hey, I got it, right? And they leave the classroom and we never cover it again, right, until test day. And that can lead to some real problems, some assumptions about learning that they find out on test day they don't know, and that's a problem, right? So I want to talk about how I have real conversations, real honest conversations with my students about this, about looking at, how do I know what I know? How do I know what I don't know? And how do I tailor my future studies because of a true assessment of my learning, and not just I was given 10 questions and I looked up 10 answers in the textbook and I wrote them down. So now I'm done. My assessment is I know 10 things when really you don't, right? Because if you did, you would have answered all 10 without the use of your textbook. Or going back to the original scenario, if there were 10 questions and you knew all 10, you would have written them down and you would have known all the answers before we went over them in class. You would have known those answers right then. And that would have been a more honest assessment than the teacher giving out all the answers, right? And you write them in as you go, or using some aid, whether it be a notebook, a textbook, or even a buddy sitting next to you to help you out with the answers. Again, if you have to use any of those things, any of those aids, then you didn't know it well enough, right? Or at least that's what I tell my kids, my students in class, because we don't want them assuming, right? The assumption of learning is not a good thing. And I think that naturally or intuitively, we do that a lot. A lot of studies out there, one in particular by Dr. Jeffrey Karpicki on, how students study. And I believe that study showed that most of them intuitively believe that they're learning and then they're studying by rereading information, rereading their notes the day before a test, or, looking at their notes and highlighting terms and things like that, instead of much more fruitful ways, much more honest assessments of their learning, that, again, we don't talk about in class. We just, we assume they know it ourselves, maybe as teachers, or maybe we don't even feel comfortable talking about it. There's a comfort level in here for both teachers and students that we kind of got to get out of also. If you think about it, it's much more comfortable to study reading your notes, because if I'm reading my notes, there's nothing to get wrong, right? And we don't like to get things wrong. I don't think humans like to be wrong about things. You can look at arguments on Twitter or in politics at any point, at any time. Go to CNN.com or whatever website you want, and you're going to see arguments about things, right? And no one wants to be wrong, and we'll go to great lengths to not be wrong. So, restudying by looking at our notes or just simply highlighting words is very comfortable because we can't get anything wrong. But with that comfort, we're kind of lying to ourselves about what we know, and the students are doing the same thing. So we want to try to help them and provide ways for them in class to get out of that comfort zone, and ways for them to see that, it's not as easy, it's not as nice, it's not as comfortable to try and answer questions as it is to simply restudy by looking at our notes, but it's much more effective and much more efficient, and it's a much more honest assessment of our learning than, again, simply rereading our notes. And something I say to my kids all the time as we're going through these assessments in class and I'm having them answer questions, and this is a look at what do I know and what do I don't know. You can almost put it in two columns. I got this right, I know it, or I got this wrong, I don't know it. But I tell them all the time that you'd rather get it wrong right now, when it may not be for a grade, and it's not the final test or the final assessment, whatever that looks like. You'd rather get it wrong now and know that you don't know it now than find out on the test that you don't know it. You may think that you know about different theories of, say, color vision, right? I'm a psychology teacher, so I talk about color vision in my unit on sensation and perception. You may think you know the two theories that we mentioned in class, and you may, okay, I heard Coach Harvard talk about it, but if you're never made to explain that, to write down those theories and to compare and contrast them and apply them, you're just assuming you know it. Now, maybe your assumptions are correct, but I mean, I don't want to live on assumptions, right? I'd rather prove that I know it or prove that I don't know it, and that's where we get into that uncomfortable part. But I'd rather prove that I don't know it to myself now so that I can study that, right? And, another aspect of this that students don't really care for is that through studying, through assessment, and through trial and error, trying to answer questions, they're finding that they have more to study. The things that they get incorrect, they're going to have to study more. And that's not very fun. Again, going back to we don't like to get things right. It's not very fun to find out that this studying that I thought was going to take 15 minutes is now going to take me 20 minutes because I've got to look back over some things. Again, but also, I kind of play it to them like this. You're also finding out that, I got these 6, 7 things right. So I'm not going to focus on those things, at least right away. I'm going to focus on the things I got wrong first. So in the long run, it can actually be more efficient because you're not restudying or rereading, if that's all you're going to do, which they shouldn't. You're not restudying the things that you have already proven to yourself that you know. Now, what I'm not saying, though, is that you get it right once and you stop looking at it, right? It's all obviously healthy to think back over things and reuse them for, retrieval practice and strengthening those memories and those connections. But, I'm not going to focus on those at first. The first things I tell my students to look at and focus on these are the things I got wrong. I know I've got to look at those because I surely shouldn't assume that I'm going to get those right on the final assessment before I go and look at the things that I got right again, just to make sure I hammered it home there and I didn't just get lucky and get it right. So they'd rather get it wrong now and figure out what to study than figure it out on the test day. I think we've all had students in class who thought they were going to do really well on an assessment, and then they take it and didn't do nearly as well as they thought they were going to do, and they're surprised by that. And I think a lot of the times that surprising, that emotion there stems from poor study habits and the assumption of learning. Rarely ever do I have students who've practiced their learning via retrieval practice and true, honest assessment. They're usually not the ones that are surprised on test day by what they got wrong. They know what they know and they know what they don't know, and they can adjust accordingly. So we want to drill this into our kids in the sense that we want to talk about it a lot. We want to have explicit conversations. The way I'm talking to you right now about this is exactly how I talk to my students about it. I say these things over and over again. And again, and it's not something I say once. Every time we're doing these little assessments in class where I give them 10 minutes to really truly try to answer these using their brain only, no books and no buddy, I'm walking around, and every once in a while I'll throw out that hint of, realize what you're getting right now and realize what you're getting wrong. And what does that tell you about what you need to do in the future, right? When you're scheduling out your practice or your study time at home, what does that need to look like now? What things are at the top of your list now to study? And what things can we kind of put on the back burner, at least for a little bit, and look at later before the test, but they're not my central focus, at least at first. And this is also, like I said earlier, this isn't something that just applies to my class. It's applying to how they study and how they should learn. This is learning. It's not just learning in psychology class. It's learning no matter what class they're in and at every level, right? It doesn't matter if it's an advanced placement class, an honors class, a regular class, or whatever. This is how we learn. And there's actually been some studies out there that retrieval practice and studying like this actually benefits those learners who have the least knowledge. It benefits them the most. Why not use it, right? Why not use it? So, I'm trying to get them to use this not only in my class, but in every class. And even beyond that, a lot of my students are going to go on to a 2-year or a 4-year college or university. And this is how they need to study there. We've all been there. A professor's not going to hold their hand and not say, okay, guys, it's class time, so let's practice what we know. No, the professor's going to lecture, and then that's it. So these students have to have these skills and these abilities now, because a lot of them will sink in college if they're made to try to figure it out for themselves at that point. It's probably too late for them. So I want to practice with them now. I want to hold their hand a little bit now through this. And then, again, tell them over and over again, this is how we learn. This is what you need to do in college. This is what you need to do in science class. This is what you need to do all the time, not just in my class. So a couple of things that I look for with an honest assessment of learning, right? Number one, they're only using their brain. And I hit on that earlier, but they're only using their brain at this point. So they're not going to use notebook. They're not going to use their buddy. They're not going to use the internet. They're just simply with a question, and can they answer it? No help at all. And again, can be uncomfortable, but you'd rather know that you don't know it now than later. Number two, I like to use more recall than recognition questions. So more fill in the blank without a word bank, more short answer, more essay, things like that, rather than your matching or your multiple choice, where they just have to recognize the answer in there. I'm not saying that recognition questions are bad per se, but when I want to know what I know and what I don't know, I want to give myself the fewest amount of aids and the fewest amount of help possible. So I want more recall questions where I can either fill in that blank, I can either tell you a couple of sentences about that process or that concept, or I can't, and I know it right away, right? And again, without any help, right? And then lastly, I ask my students to look back at their assessments and look at all of their questions and either indicate along the way or at the end of their level of confidence, right? Did you guess is something I say a lot in class. Did you guess on this? Because even if you guessed and got it right, I don't know how much you should take that, right? Like, how much does that mean you know? That kind of needs to go in the loss column there, not a win column, if you guessed and got it right. Again, this is another reason why you want to stay away from recognition questions, because students can guess and get those right, obviously a lot easier than a recall question. So I want them also to not only look at what they got wrong, right? Obviously that's something they don't know, but also, did you guess? Now, I'm not telling them not to guess, because if they guess and get it right, man, that's a nice little bit of context there that can get filed away that can help them remember it in the future. I want them to try and guess, but because you guessed, don't assume that you know it. It still needs to be up high on that list of these are the things I need to study before the final assessment. So, just a little recap there. Again, 3 things I'm looking for an honest assessment, right? Did you only use your brain? Recall questions more than recognition questions. And then finally, looking at how much I guessed on that assessment. right? And if you're thinking about those three things, you're probably producing some pretty honest assessments of your students' learning. And again, I'm telling my students that when they're studying later, again, and for this class or in the future, college, university, another high school, grade or whatever, this is how they need to design their own study habits, right? They need to be answering questions, not just looking at answering questions as an assessment for a grade, but assessment is the way to actually learn also, right? And you've probably heard not only like assessment of learning, but assessment for learning, assessment as learning, all of those things, right? So I'm also drilling that into the kids too, as far as honest conversations and real critical conversations to have with these students about their learning that, again, we're not having enough of, I'll just say, for a myriad of reasons. But I think a lot of it has to do that we don't know how to have those conversations, or we don't realize that we need to have those conversations. We assume as teachers that they know how to do this stuff, and they, by and large, they don't, right? They don't. One last little topic here. Again, students aren't going to find this fun for the most part. Now, some are going to inherently realize the effectiveness of this and say, I see that in the long run, this is going to help me learn more, and it's going to actually make my learning more efficient, so I'll buy into it. But a lot of them are going to want to retreat back to the more comfortable, I just want to read my notes. But you've got to get them out of that habit. You've got to get them out of that comfort level. And there's some good work by Dr. Pooja Agarwal on this, and indicating that retrieval practice is actually good for this anxiety that students may have. So avoiding retrieval practice, avoiding honest assessments is not going to do your students any good. We want to practice it with them and let them see that this isn't for a grade. This might not be as scary as you thought, right? Again, it's not fun to get things wrong, but you'd rather get it wrong now than on the final assessment, because then it's too late. But we want to practice that speech. We want to practice those actions of actually doing that assessment at first in class, and then work on getting them to do it on their own and creating maybe some of their own assessments and their own questions and things like that. So they can do it on their own with other classes or in the future at college. But it's got to start with an honest conversation. It's got to start with honest assessments and honest practice of that over and over again, in order to, make better learners out of our learners, and to provide them with a nice foundation going forward, hopefully, of how they should learn and how they should study and how they should practice. I just think this is one of the most important things we can do. I'm lucky enough that part of this with retrieval practice and space practice is actually in my curriculum as a psychology teacher. I'm teaching memory, I'm teaching cognition, I'm teaching learning, but most teachers don't, obviously. So this is like an underlying theme. Yes, I talk about this during the learning and the memory and the cognition units, but even when I'm talking about biological basis of behavior or disorders or things in my class, there's always still this hint of what's an honest assessment of this material, right? How do you need to be thinking about this? How do you know this? Make sure you're only using your brain and things like that, because it doesn't just apply to psychology. It doesn't just apply to 10th grade. It doesn't just apply to high school. And it's something that these kids really need, that needs to be focused on a lot, not just, in our classrooms, but in teacher prep courses. But obviously we don't do that. I've got a master's in education, and I never had any of this in my master's degree program. Luckily, again, I'm in psychology, so I got to know, I know it through that and through reading and some lovely people on Twitter. But we need to start in the classroom with these honest conversations and these honest assessments to make our students better students. Thank you for joining in. I hope you learned something. I hope you got a couple of nuggets there that you can at least kind of think about when you go back into the classroom, whenever that is, whether it's virtually or face-to-face, and a way to make your assessments truer, and can very positively and somewhat easily be a positive, have a positive effect on your students' learning, and in turn, your class, make your class a better class. If you have any questions or you want to, drop me a line. I'm at Effortful Educator on Twitter. Please don't hesitate to send me a message. I love talking about this stuff. I'm a nerd about assessment and learning and memory and things like that. I love to talk about it. So please drop me a line. Thank you for joining in. Quick thank you to researchED. This is my second researchED event. I was in Brooklyn in 2017. Fantastic people doing fantastic things, true and honest conferences for educators that we don't get a lot of or we don't get enough of. So I'm extremely proud to be a part of it and to just be able to talk to you today. Thank you.